Let me tell you what I've been thinking about recently. I've been thinking about a phrase that I have a feeling is becoming part of common American speech. I always wonder how it is that some phrases begin to take over our language until at last everybody uses them. And in so many instances, if somebody would ask 5, 10, or 100 years later, how did that phrase ever come into being? No one really knows for sure. I'm talking about the phrase, my pleasure. It seems to have taken the place of the old-fashioned, you're welcome. I hear it, for example, quite often in radio interviews. When the interview is ended, the person from the radio broadcasting station says, "Thank you, Mr. or Miss So-and-so," and the person replies, "My pleasure." Now, I understand that very well because I think in most cases when people are interviewed by a radio station or a network, it is their pleasure. They are grateful for the chance to display their knowledge, to indicate their point of view, or whatever it may be, so they can rightly say, "My pleasure." I hear it, however, also in restaurants. Now and again, and then and now, I find when one says to a server, when they brought that second glass of iced tea, and you say, thank you very much, they often reply, "My pleasure." It's a nice phrase. I don't know how sincere it always is. I'm still waiting, with some twist in my sense of humor probably, for someone someday to reply, "My displeasure." And I'll wonder to myself if at last I've gotten an honest server. But most people really are that cordial that they would use the term, "my pleasure." But it comes back to the fact that we really have almost dropped from our speech the old phrase, "You're welcome." I dropped it a long while ago. I find myself again and again and again, when somebody thanks me for something, I reply, "Thank you." That is to say, it's been more my satisfaction to be able to do this than it has been yours to receive it. So it just becomes thank you, back and forth, back and forth. Thus, it could well be, that thank you could go on and on like these comedy imitations of Oriental peoples who bow and the other person bows and the bowing goes on because the one unfamiliar with Oriental practices isn't sure when the bowing should come to an end. So with thank you, how many times do you say thank you? There has to be an end to it, and the end used to be, as I say, to say, "You're welcome." Something in us, you see, wants to be thankful. We want to be grateful. And therefore, if we've done something that brings a thank you from another person, we aren't content just to accept their thanks. We think that perhaps we ought now to respond in kind. So what we're saying, I guess, is, thank you for thanking me. We can't quite let the thank you exist just on its own, but somehow to say you're welcome doesn't have the same quality that it used to have. And that's probably too bad. You're welcome was a good term. But now this new term, my pleasure. That's an abbreviated term, of course, characteristic of our times. It really is meant to be, it is my pleasure, or it's my pleasure, but it's been cut down simply to my pleasure. And it's a nice thing to hear, even if I'm not entirely sure always that it's altogether sincere, but for that matter, maybe not all thank yous are sincere either. So I'll buy it. I like it. But the more I've thought about it, the more I've realized that there's a special word to be said about that phrase, and where I do remember hearing it before. I realize I've been hearing that phrase again and again and again, more thousands of times than I can ever mention, long before I heard it on public radio, long before I heard it in restaurants I heard that phrase, my pleasure. I heard it in my soul, in those moments when I have said to God, thank you. And God has said to me, my pleasure. Because God delights in doing for us the kindnesses that we receive. And when we say thank you to God, if we'll listen just a little bit, we'll hear God answer, my pleasure. Because God finds pleasure in blessing us. That's what I've been thinking about today.